Imagine boarding Flight 782 to San Francisco. You've arrived early, breezed through TSA, and now sink quietly into seat 1A. You're not loud, not flashy. Just a man in a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and scuffed sneakers. You scroll through your calendar. In 2 hours, a crucial boardroom waits for you, one that could unlock millions in healthcare funding for underserved communities. The stakes are high, but you remain composed. Then a voice slices the cabin air. "Sir, you need to move. To the back. This section is for our premium passengers only." The voice belongs to Amanda Walsh, lead flight attendant for Pacific Eagle Airlines. Her uniform is pressed, her tone impatient. Her hand taps a tablet screen with practiced authority. She doesn't raise her voice, but she doesn't need to. Her volume carries judgment more sharply than words. You look up, you don't flinch, you reach into your backpack and calmly hand her your boarding pass. "1A, first class," you say. Her brows knit, her lips purse. She doesn't scan the code. Instead, she says what you've heard before in too many places. "That has to be a mistake. Can I see your ID? Phones are already out. Row 3, aisle seat, Dr. Lorraine Hill starts recording. Row 2, window, a middle-aged man in a suit leans. Forward says, "Maybe just move to your real seat, no need to stir things up." Amanda smirks, emboldened by the assumption. "Exactly, sir. These mistakes happen. Booking can be confusing." You take a breath, not because you're uncertain, but because you know this moment is bigger than your seat. You reach into your wallet and lay a sleek metal card on the tray table. It glints under cabin lighting. More Global Platinum, 6 consecutive years. Amanda doesn't blink. "Anyone can buy those online," she replies. The crowd senses something. Wrong. Someone tweets, "Live on Flight 782, black passenger being humiliated despite showing ID and boarding pass." WTF? Views spike in seconds. Flight 782 discrimination trends. But the cabin doesn't pause. Amanda calls the captain, and the captain, Bradley Haynes, emerges like a storm cloud. He doesn't ask. He doesn't verify. He scans your hoodie and sneakers and says, "Sir, move now, or we'll have security assist." You don't argue. You don't shout. You start recording. "For the record," you say, "this is Flight 782. I'm being asked to vacate my assigned first-class seat despite full documentation." The captain calls for security. Around you, phones click on like streetlights at dusk. This should have ended there, but it didn't. Because while Amanda and Captain Haynes try to have you removed, they miss one thing. You're not just a passenger. You're Julian Moore, CEO of Moore Global Capital. Your firm owns 21% of Pacific Eagle Airlines. You funded the airline's latest inclusion training initiative. You hold voting power on its board. But at that moment, none of that matters, because the system didn't see a man of power. It saw a black man out of place. What happens next unravels over 45 minutes in front of passengers, live streams, and millions online. You'll face indignity with poise. You'll trigger corporate panic with calm logic. You'll make a phone call that shifts the entire landscape of one airline, and eventually an entire industry. But in this exact moment, you sit, surrounded by suspicion, assumptions, and the quiet, enduring weight of being doubted in public. Again, you think of your father, Vietnam vet, Bronze Star recipient, denied service at a restaurant in 1972 because of his skin. "Son," he once said, "you will wear a suit and still get questioned. You'll earn respect and still be stopped. But don't let anger be your legacy. Use your mind. Make them remember you for how you responded. You didn't know it then, but those words would shape this moment. Because this story, your story, is not just about a seat in first class. It's about who gets believed, who gets to be assumed competent, and what happens when a system designed to serve people forgets that dignity isn't earned through appearance, but owed through humanity. This is the story of Flight 782. And It doesn't end at the gate. You'd think Tuesday afternoon at gate 22 would feel routine. Passengers settle. Overhead bins click shut. Flight attendants check trays. But for Julian Moore, it's anything but normal. Seated quietly in 1A, he hears Amanda Walsh's shoes clicking back and forth, like a metronome of tension. Her tablet glows the words, "seat mismatch," the voice of authority, the presumption of error, not a misunderstanding, but an assumption, rooted in appearance over facts. Amanda stands over Julian, stern eyes locked. "Sir, did you not hear me? You're in coach." Not even a question. He raises his hand, handing over boarding pass and ID systematically, just as he'd done 100 flights. He holds everything steady, no flare of white-knuckle frustration, no raised voice, just quiet, deliberate calm. Every eye in that cabin is on him now. "First class, seat 1A, he confirms softly. Amanda's lips press tight. She glances to the video recording icons near every headrest and rows of phones pointed toward them. Behind her, Jessica, her colleague, watches with a questioning look. You can almost feel the internal friction, duty to protocol versus human empathy. Amanda chooses protocol. Jessica doesn't say a word. The moment stretches. Julian's mind goes back, again, to his father. Visual flashes. His dad in uniform, denied, disrespected. Teaching respect, yes, but also quiet dignity in the face of injustice. Julian glances back at Dr. Lorraine Hill, camera rolling, her, expression fierce, unafraid. Julian nods subtly, she nods back. A pact. Truth will out. Amanda scans his boarding details on her tablet. She scrolls, taps, frowns. "Sir, records show economy ticket," she says flatly. No empathy. Julian swallows annoyance. "That's incorrect. I purchased this 3 weeks ago. Seat 1A, he replies, voice measured, factual. He taps the mobile boarding app. She narrows her gaze but doesn't argue further. Instead, she signals to someone off-screen. Row 2's suit-turning anchorman leans in from 2A. "Son, maybe just take coach. Don't be a problem." Amanda smiles, absorbing reinforcement. Behind him, phones jolt higher. A tweet blazes, "Black CEO humiliated in flight over seat. This is ridiculous." Within seconds, hundreds of retweets. Then Captain Bradley Haynes enters. Tall, clean uniform. He doesn't check credentials. He doesn't touch documents. He evaluates the hoodie, the sneakers, the briefcase. The absence of tie or suit gives him justification in his eyes. He steps up, voice authoritative. "Sir, you're delaying departure. Move now." Julian meets his gaze, calm yet firm. "Captain Haynes, I'm in my ticketed seat. 1A. I have boarding pass, photo ID, and frequent flyer card." Captain Haynes shakes his head. "I have 15 years experience, sir, and I know when someone's trying to game the system." His tone implies guilt, not ignorance. This is the crack in the moment. Assumption speaks louder than evidence. Julian doesn't pause. He holds his phone up. Recording. He announces, "For the record, Flight 782, 2:47 p.m., being removed from first class despite full documentation." He posts live, already trending. Amanda reaches for the radio mic, calling ground security. "Ground control, we need security at gate 22. Passenger refusing to move." Her voice has authority now. Passengers shift in seats. Dr. Hill stands, mid-aisle, holding phone out. "Wait, look at his boarding pass. Why not scan it?" she asks loud enough that everyone hears. Amanda glares. "Ma'am, please remain seated." Even as she speaks, the logic unravels. 2 security officers, Mike Gath, Edwards and Lisa Cheng, arrive. Mike is steady, composed, Lisa polite yet inquisitive. Haynes points at Julian. Refusing to comply, team approaches. Mike calmly asks for documents. Julian gives them all. Ticket, ID, platinum status card. Mike scans, cross-checks. The C nails crack against protocol. Mike looks up at Haynes, then back to Amanda. Sir, this pass is valid. Seat 1A. Amanda shrugs, deflects. The tension tightens. The cabin cameras capture every moment. The official word calls him disruptive. But the cameras know the truth. Phones light up as the cabin crowd senses evidence outweighs prejudice. Julian doesn't take a step down. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't break composure. He stands in his seat. Quiet strength. Doctors like Dr. Hill press record. Jessica shifts uncomfortably. Zoe Tran shoots a look at Julian. The guilt is visible now. A heartbeat later, Julian reaches into his briefcase, produces a sleek card, metal sheen in fluorescent cabin light. Moore Global Capital, CEO, 21% shareholder. The cabin hushes, passengers lean in, the tone flips. Amanda blanches, Haynes pales, Zoe gasps. The boarding area morphs into a theater of reckoning. Julian makes a call, live. This is Julian Moore. I'm in coach. Sorry, first class, flight 782. We have a situation. I'm requesting CEO Carol Simmons to intervene. His tone is still calm, still measured. The boardroom reacts. Cabin whispers spread. Phones flash. Passers-by snap more photos. The emergency buzz starts. A named roster card doesn't protect you when the system doesn't scan it. But in this moment, it does. It shows your character. It shows your stake. The cabin thrusts into action. Zoe steps in. Her voice shakes. I knew what I saw, but I stayed quiet. I'm sorry. Cabin quiets. That admission cracks the mentality of just doing my job. Julian nods, offering forgiveness, framework, hope. Thank you, he says. Let's fix this together. By the 45-minute mark, Flight 782 is delayed. Heads of airline staff gather at the gate. Cameras circle. Passengers record every word. Julian remains calm, collected. He's on the sidelines, but he's not silent. He's not going anywhere. And somewhere in the background, the system starts to crack because Julian, quiet man in a hoodie, just made everyone ask the same question. Who do we belong to? In that moment, Julian becomes more than a passenger. He becomes the defining encounter that decides whether dignity or bias wins. The boarding area at Gate 22 no longer feels like part of an airport. It feels like a courtroom, one without robes, but with judgment in every gaze, every smartphone lens trained on the man in seat 1A. Julian Moore stands at the center, not because he demanded the spotlight, but because the system pushed him into it. All he did was board his flight. What they did was assume he didn't belong. The power shift doesn't begin with shouting. It starts with silence. Amanda Walsh stares at the business card in her hand, her face pale. Captain Haynes stiffens, realizing that his judgment may have just cost him more than a delay. It may cost him his career. Zoe Tran doesn't speak, but her posture has changed. She's no longer shrinking into the background. She's watching, listening. Julian checks his watch. 3:07 p.m. Delayed 40 minutes. He makes a second call, this one shorter. Passengers nearby catch fragments. Conference room, board assembled, yes, tell them to wait. He ends the call without fanfare, then turns back to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. I know you have places to be, but I believe what's happening here is no longer just about a seat. The murmurs ripple. Dr. Lorraine Hill lowers her phone slightly. Who are you? She asks, not with suspicion, but with awe. Julian opens his briefcase and begins laying out documents. He isn't posturing, he's presenting, like he's in a boardroom. Because in many ways, he is. 6 months ago, Moore Global Capital acquired a 21% stake in Pacific Eagle Airlines, he says calmly. We've invested $1.8 billion into this company, not just for profit, but to help it evolve. One of those initiatives? A $400,000 donation for diversity and inclusion training. Gasps. The word billion hangs in the air like smoke. Amanda sways slightly on her feet. Captain Haynes says nothing, but the flush in his cheeks deepens. A man in row 4 whispers, "He owns part of the airline?" Someone live streaming repeats it louder. "He's not just a CEO, he's a shareholder." Julian doesn't flinch. "I don't need special treatment," he says. "But I do expect equal treatment. We all should." Then his phone buzzes. A single message. "Call in ready. CEO Carol Simmons standing by." He reads it, then looks to the crowd and the airline staff gathered like a jury. It's time for transparency. He dials. The call connects through speaker mode. "Julian?" A woman's voice echoes. Firm, direct. "What's happening?" "At gate 22? Julian responds in the same tone. "Carol, I boarded flight 782 with a paid first-class ticket. I was removed by your crew under the assumption that I didn't belong in that seat, despite showing ID, boarding pass, and elite status." The silence on the other end says everything. Then, "Please tell me this isn't live." "It's live," Julian says, "and it's trending." Phones around the terminal ping and buzz in affirmation. Comments roll in. "He's calling the CEO now?" "This man is everything." Pacific Eagle Airlines about to crumble. Carol inhales. "Julian, what do you need?" Julian doesn't hesitate. "Immediate accountability, not in theory, in action. Your crew created a legal and public crisis. I need termination of responsible personnel, implementation of bias training, independent incident reporting, funding for inclusion reform, and executive compensation tied to results." Carol sighs. "Publicly?" "Yes. Transparently. The moment demands it." Captain Haynes takes a step forward. "Mr. Moore, we didn't know who you were." "That," Julian replies, locking eyes with him, "is precisely the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. You just needed to check the facts." A quiet gasp moves through the crowd. Amanda tries to speak, but no words come out. Instead, Zoe Tran finds hers. I want to say something." Julian gestures gently. "Go ahead." "I saw the boarding pass," Zoe says, voice trembling. "I saw everything. But I didn't speak up. I didn't know what would happen. I thought maybe it wasn't my place, but it was. And I was wrong. The admission isn't theatrical. It's human. Real." And the entire tone of the terminal begins to shift. Even people who hadn't paid attention are now turning their heads, listening, recording, watching the unraveling of assumption into accountability. Julian nods. "Thank you, Zoe." Carol's voice returns on speaker. "Julian, your requests are being sent to the board now. They're reviewing. You'll have an answer within the hour." "You have 10 minutes, Julian replies. "The system needs to show urgency, not delay." Another buzz on his phone. Another text. "Live viewership hit 4,000. Media outlets reaching out. This isn't just a passenger dispute anymore. It's a viral reckoning." Amanda clutches her radio like it might save her. Captain Haynes stares at the floor. Julian places one more document on the table. "This," he says, "is the original grant document for your training initiative. My foundation funded it. The same initiative this crew never completed, or worse, ignored." He pauses. Then, "This isn't about a seat. It's about a system that looks at a black man in a hoodie and assumes fraud before fact. That hires people who fear accountability. That trains staff to follow rules, but not justice." The final words land with weight. Julian doesn't shout. He doesn't flinch. But his presence commands everything now. The man in 2A, who earlier told him to just sit in coach, quietly deletes his own tweet. Dr. Hill stops recording, not because it's over, but because the message is clear. The balance of power has changed. And for the first time since boarding, Julian sits back down in seat 1A. Not to fly, not yet, but to let the weight of this moment settle. because the rules of the flight have changed, and so has who's in control of them. Tension that once gripped Gate 22 begins to uncoil, but only slightly. Julian Moore is no longer just a passenger who was wronged. He is now a mirror held up to an entire system. And what it reflects is not one mistake, but a culture of unchecked assumption. Inside Pacific Eagle Airlines headquarters, the emergency boardroom lights are on even though the sun is still up. Carol Simmons, CEO, has convened her executive team, legal advisors, and communications staff. On the wall, 3 screens show the same storm from different angles. The live stream from Gate 22, the plummeting stock ticker, and a flood of social media sentiment under hashtags like dignity, in-flight, and more knotless. "Put Julian on the main screen," Carol orders. Seconds later, Julian's face appears, broadcast from a quiet corner of the gate, standing calmly beside a chair turned into a mobile command station. Documents neatly stacked, phones still trained on him. Zoe Tran, the formerly silent attendant, now stands beside him, not as an accomplice, but as a witness. "Julian," Carol begins, "before we get to solutions, I need to understand, how did this happen so fast?" Julian answers without ego. "Because the infrastructure was already broken. All I did was apply pressure." He shares his screen with the board. Charts flicker into view, data on discrimination complaints filed against Pacific Eagle in the last 12 months, 192 total, a rate 42% above industry average. Next slide, complaint resolution times. Most remained unresolved for over 90 days. Another click, internal staff surveys. Only 18% of frontline employees believed their diversity training was meaningful. Board members begin scribbling. Legal counsel shakes their heads. Julian continues. "What happened at Gate 22 isn't new. It's just visible now. The public can't unsee what they've seen. You don't have a PR problem. You have a culture problem." Carol leans forward. "We accept responsibility. But how do we move from apology to transformation?" Julian nods. "Start by acknowledging that this wasn't about Amanda or Haynes alone. It's about who hired them, who trained them, who ignored the data." At the gate, another small crowd has gathered. Former passengers, airport staff, a local news team. Julian doesn't perform. He speaks with quiet weight. "I've read the employee handbook. I've read the corporate ethics report. Your own documents call for zero tolerance of discrimination. But tolerance is not the issue. It's absence of accountability." Carol, now visibly impacted, asks, "What do you propose?" Julian lifts the next page from his stack. Third-party reviews of all discrimination complaints, mandatory retraining of leadership, a published quarterly equity report, and one more thing, executive compensation linked to actual inclusion outcomes. A silence. Then a board member asks, "Julian, won't that put our leadership in conflict with union rules and compensation frameworks?" Julian responds calmly, "It's not conflict, it's alignment. If you want accountability from staff, start with yourselves." Meanwhile, at the gate, Amanda Walsh is escorted quietly into a side room. Not handcuffed, not humiliated, just removed. Captain Haynes is pulled aside as well, credentials under review. And yet, none of this feels like revenge. It feels like gravity, systems adjusting to a new center of mass. Zoe Tran turns to Julian. "I've worked here 7 years. I've seen this before, but never spoke up. I thought staying silent was safer." Julian answers, "Most people don't fail out of malice. They fail out of fear." But silence protects the wrong side. Dr. Lorraine Hill joins them. "Julian, what do you need from us?" He thinks briefly, then says, "Continue watching, not just me, but the process. Systems change when people stay engaged after the cameras stop rolling." Back in the boardroom, Carol makes a decision. "We're implementing all of Julian's conditions. Immediate terminations where necessary, training to start within 48 hours, reporting system live by Monday." Julian offers no celebration, only resolve. Good. Then let's turn this into precedent, not just reaction. And so a shift occurs. Not loud, not theatrical, but systemic. A recognition that this wasn't a one-off event. This was a tipping point. Julian's inbox pings, a message from a young woman named Erica Holmes. Saw your story. Same thing happened to me last year. I didn't have a voice. Now I do. Thank you. He adds her email to a folder marked Future Action. The camera crews, still filming from afar, catch the quiet smile that spreads across his face. Not because justice was done, but because the process of building something better had finally begun. Less than 72 hours after Flight 782 was delayed on the tarmac of Gate 22, Pacific Eagle Airlines had already begun rewriting itself, not in marketing brochures or carefully worded apologies, but in documents signed with urgency and weight. Julian Moore sits in his Chicago office, an open window letting in the summer. Wind off Lake Michigan. In front of him, a stack of termination letters, training protocols, equity benchmarks. His assistant, Maria Alvarez, walks in with a quiet confidence. First wave of changes complete, she says. Amanda Walsh and Captain Haynes, both terminated with cause. Zoe Tran volunteered to lead the first round of staff-wide bias training. Julian nods slowly, reading every line. He's not interested in headlines. He wants substance. Training. Materials? He asks. Rolled out at 6 a.m. today, Maria replies. Every employee has to complete 8 hours of equity education. Third-party firms handling it, and we've had over 24 staff proactively report bias incidents in the last 24 hours, some from last week, some from last year. Julian's hand rests lightly on the documents. That's real change, he murmurs. Not press releases, participation. Outside, Pacific Eagle's stock, which had dipped sharply the day of the incident, has not only recovered, it's climbed 3.2%. The markets love clarity. But more than that, investors love when companies face problems fast. It's not the crisis that determines value, it's the response. Carol Simmons appears on screen for a video call. She looks less exhausted than she did at the board meeting, but there's still tension behind her voice. Julian, she says, the framework is live. We've launched the reporting portal, quarterly progress dashboards. We're even licensing the training program to 5 regional airlines. Julian tilts his head. Already? We named it after the protocol you set. Internally, they're calling it the Moore framework. Julian doesn't react with pride. He reacts with purpose. That's fine. Just make sure it works. Carol continues. Executive bonuses tied to DEI metrics as of this quarter. Legal team has embedded it into board policy. We'll be doing a public town hall next week. You're invited. Julian says nothing for a beat, then. That town hall shouldn't be about me. Make it about the people who've been ignored for years. Carol nods. We've also launched an internal mentorship program. Zoe is leading that too. She wanted you to know. Julian smiles. Barely. Good. That matters. Meanwhile, across the industry, ripples are becoming waves. Erica Holmes, who wrote to Julian days ago, has filed a formal discrimination complaint against a major competitor airline. With legal help from a civil rights organization, her case is likely to settle soon. She credits Julian publicly for her courage. A viral clip of her saying, I didn't have power, but I saw what he did, and I knew I wasn't alone, garners 500,000 views. At the same time, federal regulators begin consulting Julian's team about using parts of the Moore framework as a national model. The Department of Transportation prepares guidelines for reporting bias incidents on all domestic airlines. Maria enters again, holding an envelope. From Angela Thompson, she says. Julian opens the handwritten letter. Angela is a young MBA graduate who had an almost identical experience months prior. No one believed her. No one apologized. She writes, "Watching you demand accountability gave me the courage to take my own case to court. I'm now working with a coalition to track systemic bias across transportation sectors. We call it Project 1A. Julian folds the letter carefully, adds it to a folder labeled Future Leaders. At that moment, the dignity movement that started in one cabin seat spreads to buses, trains, ride-shares. Greyhound announces its first anti-bias training program in a decade. Amtrak hires its first chief diversity officer. 3 major hotel chains begin offering anonymous discrimination reporting tools for guests and staff. Carol's voice breaks into Julian's thoughts again. "You're going to be asked to do interviews," she says. "A lot of them. CNN, CNBC, Harvard Business Review wants to write a case study." Julian shrugs. "I'll speak, but I want the story told right. This wasn't about getting revenge. It was about restructuring a system that let quiet injustice pass as procedure." Carol leans back in her chair. "That's what landed. Not just in the media, but internally. We had employees write in, some with tears in their notes, saying they'd finally seen someone challenge the rules without rage, just clarity, and it gave them permission to rethink their silence." Julian looks into the screen. "Good. Then, this wasn't a performance. It was a precedent." The following week, Pacific Eagle hosts its first public town hall. Over 2,800 viewers log in. The top trending question on the live stream: "What does real inclusion feel like to the person sitting in seat 1A? Julian answers live. "It feels like this. Not being seen as an exception, but as a rightful participant. Not requiring titles, wealth, or threats to receive basic courtesy. It feels like boarding a plane without your dignity being evaluated." At the gate, the comments erupt. Thousands repost the clip. The hashtag #ThatDarSeat1A challenge begins trending as people share their own stories of being doubted, dismissed, or delayed based on race, gender, or class. In the background, policy becomes practice. Practice becomes pattern. And dignity, once treated as optional, becomes standard. Because this wasn't just about accountability, it was about making accountability structural. 2 years after Flight 782 became a flashpoint, Julian Moore stands behind a polished wooden podium at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. The auditorium holds over 800 attendees: airline executives, civil rights lawyers, regulators, everyday travelers. But beyond the seats is a larger audience, tens of thousands watching online, all drawn to a simple promise: dignity can be designed into the system. Julian wears no tie. He rarely does. He looks out over the room and lets the silence settle before speaking. "Change," he says, "doesn't begin with outrage. It begins with observation, and accountability turns that observation into momentum." The screens behind him flicker to life, line graphs showing a 71% drop in transportation-related discrimination complaints in just under 2 years. Airline bias incidents reported publicly, policies rewritten, trainings implemented, executives held accountable not just for margins, but for equity. Then a different image appears. Sarah Walsh. She stands in the back of the auditorium. The same flight attendant who once tried to remove him from seat 1A. But today, she's not in uniform. She's a consultant, now working with a national nonprofit to reform frontline training in service industries. When the Q&A begins, she raises her hand. "Mr. Moore," she says quietly, "I was wrong. Back then I was following scripts, but what I've learned since is that the scripts were broken. I want to thank you for not just confronting me, but challenging the system I was part of." The audience doesn't gasp. They applaud, sustained and warm. Julian nods. "Sarah," he says, "what you did, facing your mistake and transforming it into service, is what this movement needs most. Not perfection, but progress." On the final slide behind him is the image of Angela Thompson, the young black MBA grad whose letter started a new wave of advocacy. Angela recently won a landmark settlement against a major airline. That settlement funded bias recognition training for 47,000 employees and ceded legal protections across the sector. She walks onto stage as the audience rises to their feet. She wasn't a CEO, Julian says. She wasn't a shareholder, but she did the same thing we're all called to do: document injustice, demand better, and refuse to normalize silence. By now, Julian's story has become more than a case study. Business schools teach it as stakeholder activism in motion. Government offices use it to train compliance teams. But for Julian, it's always been personal. Not about power, about presence. He recalls the moment Amanda Walsh first told him, "This seat isn't for you." The phrase was casual, coded, but powerful, because it echoed every institutional whisper black professionals have ever heard. "You're not supposed to be here. This isn't your place." And yet, Julian didn't yell. He didn't storm. He stayed seated, recorded, called the boardroom, and rewrote the entire flight plan. Now that incident is memorialized not in infamy, but in transformation. Pacific Eagle's More framework is industry standard. An entire ecosystem shifted, not because Julian shouted, but because he knew exactly which levers to pull. As the summit ends, dozens of attendees approach Julian. Not for selfies, but to share. A mother whose teenage son was once removed from a flight for looking suspicious. A disabled veteran who now sits on an accessibility advisory board. A flight attendant who asked to be transferred after reporting her own captain's discriminatory behavior and was supported, not punished. Each one adds a new layer to the story. Justice, Julian tells them, isn't a finish line. It's an infrastructure. It has to be built brick, by policy, by training, by people willing to risk comfort for fairness. Before leaving, Julian turns to face the camera streaming live. His final message is simple. If you've been silenced, speak. If you've been sidelined, document. If you've been watching injustice happen, act. Not everyone has my platform, but everyone has a voice. He steps away from the podium. Behind him, the words light up in clean serif font across the screen. Every seat deserves dignity. Every flight. Every time. The crowd stands again. Applause swells not for a man, but for the movement. And somewhere, on a quiet future flight, a passenger boards in a hoodie and sneakers. No one questions him. No one glances sideways. He takes his seat in 1A, not with defiance, not with hesitation, but with quiet confidence, because someone before him refused to move, and that refusal changed everything.